This time around on Author's Corner here on America Tonight with me, Kate Delaney. I'm so excited because we have, really, he's super well known, Denis O'Neill with us. And we're talking about Bradford's Walk, a bit of doggerel. And it's so interesting. The book is interesting and fascinating, but he's fascinating as well. And I think this is a must read. You need to put this on your bookshelf. You need to read it to kids. You need to get it for yourself. It is so fascinating. We are definitely a show that is pro dog, and we are pro Denis O'Neill too. Wait till you learn more about him. So Denis, thanks for coming on.
Hey, such sweet words. Thanks a lot. This was it's going from the River Wild to Bradford's Walk. So, and by the way, quick story. In a meeting at Universal about the River Wild, there was a dog called Maggie, who was a golden retriever, and they said in the meeting, Denis, you can kill a human being, but do not hurt the dog. This was true in the River Wild. So Maggie was unscathed, as all dogs should be.
So we're going to talk about A River Wild, which of course you wrote, and all the excitement with that. You think of the main star as Meryl Streep. Kevin Bacon was also in it. John C. Reilly was also in it. It was one of my favorite movies, I have to say. And that's another thing. If you haven't seen it, definitely see this movie. But let's talk about Bradford's Walk. What was the inspiration for Bradford's Walk?
This is a fun backstory, Kate, because it's a story that the verse I wrote 40 years ago. After college, Dartmouth, I moved down to Boston. I was a folk singer. I was living there, but I grew up in Greens Farms, Connecticut, on the edge of Long Island Sound, and I had a privileged, loving childhood. So I'd go back to visit my parents in Greens Farms, and depending on who the dog they had, and for a long stretch, it was this beautiful coonhound named Bradford. And so I'd come back home, and I'd take these long 5-mile walks with him down from Turkey Hill Circle down to Long Island Sound, from Pequot Beach to Bering Hill Beach, past Nyala Farms, and past the stream where I caught my first trout, and back to the house. And it was always, this is off leash, by the way. So there was no leash involved. And Bradford was just an exuberant, loving, adventurous companion who had more energy at the start of the walk than the end. But after I did that for 5 or 6 times, I realized that there might be, a story here that could be fun to tell. And in fact, I have good school pedigree on this kind of storytelling. Ogden Nash went to St. George's School. He, of course, was a great light verseman and poet in the early part of the 1900s. And then the great Ted Geisel, Dr. Seuss, went to Dartmouth a few years ahead of me, but he was great friends with my dad, and they were both editors of the humor magazine at Dartmouth, the Jack-O-Lantern. So I felt that I was empowered by some academic connective tissue to these great comedic voices. And I'd written some poems and written short stories, and I was a folk singer, so I was writing lyrics. Anyway, so 40 years ago, I wrote 23 rhyming sing-song verses, a little doggerel. Some of it is a more predictable rhyming meter than others. And I sat on it, Kate. It was just, I wrote it and I loved it. And I just was happy having that time with Bradford. And of course, it was also, it's about going home, which is, then the story, I think, when I look back, operates on a number of levels. One, a universal walk with a dog, which is great. But more important, it's remembering your childhood and your past and going back to places that evoke these great memories. So it was, as we get older in life, as we move on, this connective tissue, I think, it's really important in our lives, just to let us know where we came from. And in this case, remind me of very happy times and with a walk with Bradford. So 2 years ago, I was on Facebook and I saw these watercolor landscapes by this fellow named Cyrus Quadland, who had gone to St. George's School with me. And we hadn't kept up. And I just communicated with him. I said, Cy, these are beautiful. And then we had a correspondence for a while. Then all of a sudden, Bradford's Walk crept back into my mind, and I said to Cyrus, you ever painted a dog or have any interest in painting a dog? He said, well, send me the verses, and I did. And what came back was the cover image of Bradford's Walk, which is a sweet beckoning, Bradford at the edge of the bed in the morning, waiting for me to get up and take him on the walk. So I knew we were in business, and then over the course of a year, Cy made another 43 illustrations, which comprised the book. And we ended up, a friend of his, wonderful artistic designer in New York State where he lives, Lisa Diebel, stitched it all together. And so I had the verses, I had the images, and she, I think, quite beautifully wove it all together into this tapestry, which, you've seen it, this walk down to the water's edge with Bradford and all the adventures along the way. So it makes me smile to this day thinking about Bradford. And, Kate, we've talked about this. If you're a dog owner in your life, you're going to have 5 or 6 dogs, maybe, some more memorable than others, but all, have a fond place in your heart, and Bradford certainly did. So it's really fun for me to look back at this book and think about my boyhood, which was very joyful in Connecticut, and then to see all these old places and visit them with this most exuberant, lovable dog, Bradford. And Cyrus, as you know, you've seen the book. I don't know how he captures dog emotions, but you're a dog owner. Somehow he figured out how to do it. So we're very pleased with the book, and thank you for the kind words.
Was it fun to reconnect with him? I mean, imagine that through social media, Facebook, and then you realize, oh, there's something here. I wonder if he could do this. And then you see what he produces, and then you match that to the words that you had written, 4 decades ago. How interesting. I mean, you've been a lot of places and you've written a lot of things. That has to feel really good.
It's thrilling. And you know this because I've written a couple of films that have gotten made. When the whole exceeds the sum of the parts, that's the most exciting part of the creative spirit. So when I wrote a screenplay and Meryl Streep, read some lines, and John C. Reilly and Kevin Bacon and Jerry Goldsmith put a score down, and Curtis Hanson, the wonderful director, figured out how to shoot the scenes. You get to a place beyond your own contribution, and that was the same thing with Bradford's Walk. I loved the verses I had written, and it brought back memories. But when I saw Cy's work, it took the story to another level, which was thrilling. And, and I think in the creative field, that's always the most exciting part, when the whole exceeds the sum of the parts. So, by the way, I only went to St. George's School for 2 years. I was in public school in Greens Farms in Westport, where I grew up. And we played different sports. So I didn't know him that well there, but it was a small class of 55 kids. So you knew everybody. And I liked him, but I just hadn't kept up with him. So connecting with him was... and then he put me back in touch with Bradford, of course, which is great. So we're very pleased with how it turned out, and it's really fun to reconnect with Cy.
Absolutely. There's something to that story too as well, which, by the way, you can get this book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever great books are sold. And we're going to tell you about Denis's website too here in a little while. Again, the name of the book, Bradford's Walk, that's easy to find. Denis O'Neill, of course. And you've mentioned it a couple of different times. Rivers Wild. The Rivers Wild was a great movie to me. It scared the bejesus out of me, but it also got me to go whitewater rafting. And I went on the New River, and I went a couple of different places. How did you create that? How did your mind come up with that?
Well, there's an easy answer. I'm a lifelong fisherman. So I went down with some of my Montana friends. I went down the Smith River in the Lewis and Clark National Forest outside of Great Falls, Montana, on a rafting trip. And on about night 2, it's a miniature Grand Canyon, Kate. It's 50 miles long, and it winds through these towering cliffs. And we were sitting around the campfire one night, and I was just hearing the crackle of the fire and the noises in the woods behind you. And I just thought, gosh, what if a bad guy like Kevin Bacon came out of the darkness and entered your life in an unpleasant way? What would you do? Because you're on the river of no return at that point. You can't get on it till you get off. So actually, it started out, I got off the river. I wrote it as a humorous piece for Fly Rod and Reel called Diary of a Mad Floater first. And then I realized the Kevin Bacon component. And in 3 weeks, I wrote a draft screenplay. And I was friends at the time with Meryl Streep's husband, Don Gummer, who's a wonderful sculptor. And Don and I were talking. He said, Denis, you don't have anything for Meryl by any chance, do you? And I said, oh, geez, Don. I just finished a draft of something, and it's a woman lead, and she's an outdoors woman about Meryl's age. He said, can I see it? I said, yeah, you can see it. So I sent it to him. And Kate, this is the good news, bad news. The good news is on my answering machine about 2 weeks later, the green light was blinking. Beep, Denis, it's Meryl. Where are you? The River Wild. I love this thing. Call me. Beep, Denis, for God's sakes, where are you? Call me. That was the good news, and that's how that started. The bad news is I lost the tape. So I don't have Meryl's voice on tape saying how much she enjoyed The River Wild.
So you can imagine what it would be like having Meryl Streep try to get a hold of you because she wants to be the star in your screenplay, The River Wild, which was produced in '94. And there's so many great actors in that, mentioning Kevin Bacon and John C. Reilly, and there were others too. So we're going to talk more about what Meryl Streep was like and being on that set and all of that with Denis O'Neill when we come back, who is also, of course, the author of Bradford's Walk. We're going to continue our conversation with Denis O'Neill, who's written 5 books. We've been talking about The River Wild and what a wild experience that was. But he's had so much success in so many different arenas, and especially with writing. And he talked about that at the start of our conversation. And to do him really justice, I mean, look, he began publishing articles and did a lot of short stories in Sports Illustrated, the Boston Globe Sunday Magazine, which is huge, Fly Rod, Antiques, American Photographer, and so many others. Plus, what was, I thought, really cool, and we had an off-air conversation about this, is he worked on staff as a freelance writer-producer for Boston's public television station, WGBH-TV. A lot of times you'll see that scroll across some of the programs you're watching, even nationally. So he wrote copy. He did programs like Frontline. Oh, I loved Frontline. Growing up in Philadelphia for a while, Jessica Savage was the host of that Frontline show, and Mystery and Masterpiece Theater, the National Ballroom Dancing Championships, Irish Treasure, no surprise there, No Irish Need Apply, and just his background lending itself to this new book, Bradford's Walk, and it's so cleverly done. It just pulls you right along. You feel like you're walking there with Denis. You really, really, really do, and imagine being there in Connecticut and doing that. And who knows what he'll do next, because you go through again his body of work, and it's just absolutely fascinating. All right, we continue with Denis O'Neill. We pick it up with more on Meryl Streep and The River Wild, and Denis talking about how really athletic she was and how she embraced that role.
She is such a good athlete besides being a great actor, Kate, and she lived for a while, had a home up in northwestern Connecticut with a lake on it, and she had a neighbor who was an Olympic rower. So she learned how to row, and in the opening scene on the Charles River, I think as we were discussing, is her in that single scull. And when we were making the movie, we had the 2 best whitewater rafting women in the American West who were her, stunt doubles. And I bet Meryl did 90% of her own work at the end of the day. She was so great at that and so accomplished. And I think it comes through. And so when she, poured, as she does with any of her roles, of course, she pours herself into the characters. So she became a river guide, and she had enough athletic ability, I think, to be very convincing. And then that kind of imbued, this mother. And when these bad guys think they're going to get her into trouble, she has, and Maggie, of course, the dog is not too far off, but they have something else to confront when Meryl Streep sets her mind to getting through the gauntlet and saving her family.
What was it like for you on the production of The River Wild? Because you got to be there for that. And there's when you write something the way you did, it's in your mind, you put it on paper, it becomes this screenplay, it's flushed out. Then all of a sudden you get somebody like Meryl Streep and other incredible actors behind it. And now you're there watching it unfold. That has to be a really unique experience that most of us will never experience. What was that like?
Oh, God, Kate, that was fun. And especially because for a motion picture, the screenplay is where it all starts. So, I'm the original chunk of clay that they start working with. As I say, to have gotten Meryl involved, don't forget Curtis Hanson, may he rest in peace. What a filmmaker he was. In a Row he made Hand That Rocks the Cradle, River Wild, L.A. Confidential, Wonder Boys, and 8 Mile. So this man was a master director, and I just was in such good hands, and I'd spent a lot of time in Montana. So The River Wild is actually 3 rivers, Kate, we filmed on: the Middle Fork of the Flathead, the Kootenai River, and then the Rogue River in Oregon. 2 quick asides that are fun. So on the night one before we started production in Kalispell, Montana. There was a dinner for the cast and crew, and John C. Reilly comes up to me and says, God, I love this Dennis. It's a great role. Can you tell me what I was like as a child, Kate? And I went, oh my God. I just froze for a minute. I went, oh my God, I only picked him up in the screenplay when he gets out of prison. And I fumbled for a while and then made up something about his backstory. But I realized at that moment that all actors, whatever chunk of their lives they're portraying in the movie, they want to know where they came from, who their parents were, who their role models were, so it was a great lesson about learning backstory, and whatever story you're writing, know how far back it goes. The other one that was fun, ended up on the Rogue River in Oregon in October shooting this summer movie. And at some point the leaves started to turn green to yellow, and they had to come out with green spray cans and spray paint the leaves green in the back of the shot so that it would maintain its summer continuity. But then, to have Jerry Goldsmith, and I forget who our DP was, he was terrific. It just was joy. For my first movie, Kate, can you imagine the luck of the draw? And I'd written 10 scripts and had one option, but so this was the first leap into this world. And again, circling back on, why it's so much fun to do Bradford's Walk with Cyrus, when you add another layer of creativity, Kate, and it just makes your original creation grow and sound better and vibrate more and be a more satisfying experience. So it was a joy. And I was on it for the whole 15 weeks. So
wow. In talking about Bradford's Walk, what do you hope people take away from, they listen to our conversation, they find your book, they read your book, they give your book as a gift, because I think it's a gift giving kind of book too. What do you hope people take away from reading it?
Kate, I think it's just a reminder that that the simple pleasures in life are sometimes the most resonant. And also, as you get older in life, and if you're lucky, the journey goes on, to be connected to your past makes the present all the more meaningful, I think. And so for me, going back to this hometown and visiting these neighborhoods and the beach where I grew up as a kid, and before Bradford arrived, I was on those beaches. And then, so he took me back, in time. It was sort of this sort of poetic time travel. And I think so, if anybody is reading it, I hope it makes them feel good about small moments in their own lives, whether it's with pets or friends or at a meal. Kate, wherever you can, I think, find joy and contentment in the world is a good place to start. But also that think about your life and the connective tissue that you have in it. And I think it just when you get closer to the end of the road than the beginning of the journey, it's really fun to know that where you've been and to be able to take stock of that. And if it makes you smile all these years later, lucky you. I was lucky. I had fantastic parents. My dad was a writer, by the way, so I was an apple that fell from a writer's tree. And he was, listen to this, Rat Pack. He came out to Hollywood just after the war. He and my mother were both in the OSS. My mom, at the age of 25, was an officer in the OSS, supplying the Maquisards, the resistance in France, with weapons and money. But they came out west, and their Rat Pack of friends from 1946 to 1948 was Ted Geisel, Robert Ryan, the actor, Jean Renoir, the filmmaker, and Elia Kazan. Now, is that a dinner party you and I want to sit in on and get involved with? Oh,
yes.
My God, Kate. The conversation must have been so much fun. And so growing up as a kid, it was a writer's house. And so a lot of Pop's friends were writers. And in fact, on the street where Bradford takes his walk, John Hershey's house is, in fact, next to, Orphan Annie. I forget the writer of Orphan Annie, but he was right there next to the John Hershey house. So it was a writer's, neighborhood, Westport was. And I could kind of hear some of those voices or feel comforted anyway by the presence of other writers who were around there. But my dad was a writer, and there was always, opinionated conversation and a lot of joy and a lot of humor and appreciation of good writing and storytelling. So that was lucky me. That's what I grew up with. My mom was from Minneapolis, and she was a star human being. I got really lucky. So
Wow. Well, you are an excellent storyteller. There's no doubt about it. And this is riveting. So I suggest that anybody listening to this go and pick up Bradford's Walk. Where else can they find you? Tell us about your website.
Kate, the website is simple. It's Denis with one N, Denis, the letter RONEILL at gmail.com. DENISRONEILL at Gmail. Excuse me, just .com, not at Gmail. And there's everything from my old folks, and there's music on it. There's the 2 movies I've had made. There are the 5 books I've published, and one including a Dartmouth memoir called Whiplash, when the Vietnam War rolled a hand grenade into the Animal House. So there's a lot of history, and Bradford is a nice addition to that lineup of things. I wrote a novelized version of my original screenplay, The River Wild, 3 or 4 years ago, and that came out, added a new character. And then speaking of dogs, I wrote a book called Canis Dirus, a thriller about dire wolves set in, so a relative of Bradford, set in Yosemite Park. So, but there's some music there from the old days. And there's a bit of history, some photographs. But that's my connective tissue right there on that site. So people want to know who was walking with Bradford. And Bradford was a real dog, and I certainly am a real person, and it's all on that website. I'd be very happy to have anybody take a look at that.
Excellent. Thank you, Denis. It was such a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks, Kate. Great to be with you.
Visit www.greatwritersmedia.com. Email us at info@greatwritersmedia.com. Call us at 877-600-5469. Subscribe now.